The silence in that living room was thicker than the Chicago winter air seeping through the old windows. I stood there, holding a manila folder that had been hidden in my bedroom dresser for 40 years. Watching my own son's face crumble like the autumn leaves outside, his wife Vanessa, who moments before had been smirking with that cruel satisfaction I'd grown to know so well, now stared at the documents in my weathered hands as if I were holding a loaded gun. "You can't throw me out of what was never yours," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Just 30 minutes earlier, Marcus had looked me straight in the eyes, these same eyes that had watched him take his first steps, that had stayed awake countless nights when he was sick, that had cried tears of joy when he graduated from Northwestern, and told me it was time to pack my things and leave. Leave the house I'd bought with my own sweat and sacrifice. Leave the home where I'd raised him and his sister after their daddy passed. Leave like I was some unwanted tenant who'd overstayed her welcome. "Mom, this house is too much for you now," he'd said, cutting into his steak like he was cutting through my heart. "Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you move into one of those senior living places. You know, where you can have people around, activities, double quotes." Vanessa had nodded along, her manicured fingers wrapped around her wine glass, those perfectly painted lips forming words that sounded caring but felt like ice picks. "It's really for your own good, Evelyn, and honestly, this place could use some updating. Marcus and I were thinking we could fix it up, maybe flip it, use the money for something that makes more sense for everyone." My grandson Darius had gone silent, his 16-year-old face flushed with an anger he didn't know how to express. He'd grown up in this kitchen, learned to tie his shoes on these very floors, built blanket forts in the living room, where we now sat having this conversation that felt more like a funeral than a family dinner. But they didn't know about the folder. They didn't know about the papers I'd kept safe all these years, the ones that proved this house, every brick, every memory, every sacrifice, belonged to me and me alone. They'd made their plans around a lie, assuming that because I was old, because I was tired, because I was just mom and grandma, I must not understand property law or my own legal rights. The look on Marcus's face when he saw those property deeds, saw his name nowhere on them, saw 40 years of his assumptions crumble in real time, that's a look I'll never forget. It was the moment my successful, college suit-wearing son realized he'd been trying to steal from the woman who gave him everything. Now, let me tell you how we got here, and why that manila folder held more power than all of Marcus's business degrees and Vanessa's manipulation combined. Before I continue with my story, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, and tell me what city and country you're in. I love connecting with people from all over the world who understand that home isn't just a building, it's where love lives. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 78 years old. But let me take you back to when I was 28, standing in the parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago, staring up at a for sale sign on a little brick house in Bronzeville. It was 1984, and I had just worked my third double shift that week as a night nurse. My scrubs were wrinkled, my feet ached something fierce, and I had exactly $847 in my checking account. But when I looked at that house, I saw something nobody else could see. I saw home. The realtor was a white man in his 50s who kept checking his watch like I was wasting his time. "This neighborhood's been changing," he said, which was his polite way of saying black families were moving in, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. "Asking price is $45,000, but honestly, I don't think the seller's gonna come down much. These old places, they need work." What he didn't understand was that I wasn't afraid of work. Work and I had been dancing partners since I was 14 years old, cleaning houses after school to help my mama pay the bills. Work had gotten me through nursing school. Work had kept food on the table after my husband Jerome died in that factory accident, leaving me with 2 babies and a mountain of grief I had to climb every single day. "I'll take it," I told him, and the way his eyebrows shot up, you'd think I'd told him I was planning to fly to the moon. "Ma'am, you understand this is a cash business. We're talking about a mortgage, credit checks, down payments, I smiled at him the way I smiled at difficult patients, kind, but firm. "Sir, I understand exactly what I'm talking about. Just tell me what papers I need to sign." The next 6 months were the hardest of my life, and that's saying something considering I'd buried a husband and raised 2 children on a nurse's salary. I worked every overtime shift I could get. I picked up weekend shifts at a clinic across town. I babysat for neighbors on my days off. I sold my grandmother's jewelry, everything except her wedding ring. which I wore on a chain around my neck for strength. Marcus was 8 then, and my daughter Keisha was 6. They didn't understand why Mama was gone so much, why we were eating beans and rice 4 nights a week, why I'd fallen asleep in my uniform, sitting at the kitchen table more times than I could count. But children are resilient, and they were happy as long as they had each other and knew I'd always come home. The house was everything that realtor said it would be, a project. The kitchen faucet leaked, the windows stuck, and the furnace made sounds like a dying elephant, but it was ours. When I signed those papers in October of 1984, when I handed over that down payment I'd scraped together dollar by dollar, I wasn't just buying a house. I was buying security. I was buying a place where my children could grow up without worrying about landlords or eviction notices or having to move every time the rent went up. I remember the first night we slept there. Marcus and Keisha had explored every closet, every corner, chattering about which room would be whose and where we'd put the Christmas tree. After I tucked them in, I sat on the front porch steps in the dark, still wearing my nursing uniform, and I cried. Not sad tears, grateful tears, exhausted tears, proud tears. I thought about Jerome, about how he'd always said we'd own our own place someday. Evie, he'd tell me while we lay in bed in our tiny apartment, someday our kid's gonna have a backyard to play in, gonna have their own rooms, gonna know what it feels like to belong somewhere. Sitting on those steps, looking up at the stars above my very own roof, I whispered to him, "We did it, baby. We actually did it." I spent the next year fixing that house room by room, learning to caulk windows from YouTube videos that hadn't been invented yet, just from watching other people and asking questions at the hardware store. My hands, already rough from years of nursing work, became even more calloused from sanding and painting and patching holes, but every improvement made it more ours, more home. The neighborhood embraced us. Mrs. Washington, next door, brought over cornbread and advice about which contractors to trust. Mr. Jenkins across the street helped me install new locks and showed Marcus how to change a tire in the driveway. We became part of something bigger than just our little family. We became part of a community that understood what it meant to work for everything you had. Marcus thrived in those early years. He'd do his homework at the kitchen table while I cooked dinner, asking me about my patients, telling me about school. "Mama," he'd say, "when I grow up, I'm gonna buy you an even bigger house." I'd ruffle his hair and tell him, "Baby, this house isn't about big or small, it's about love." And we got plenty of that. If only I could go back and whisper to that 8-year-old boy, "This house your mama is killing herself to pay for. Remember, it's built on her sacrifice. Remember, it's built on love. Remember that when you're 40 years old and successful." My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 78 years old. But let me take you back to when I was 28, standing in the parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago, staring up at a for sale sign on a little brick house in Bronzeville. It was night. Marcus graduated from Northwestern University on a crisp May morning in 2006. I sat in that auditorium in my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought specifically for his graduation, even though it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 2 months, and watched my baby boy walk across that stage to get his business degree. When they called his name, Marcus Jerome Carter, I cried so hard that Mrs. Patterson from church, who'd come with me for support, had to hand me her entire pack of tissues. That was my boy, the first Carter to graduate from college, the first one to wear a cap and gown, the first one to have opportunities I could only dream about when I was his age. After the ceremony, Marcus found me in the crowd, still in his graduation robes, and he picked me up and spun me around right there in front of everybody. "We did it, Mama," he said, and the way he said "we" made my heart sing, because it was we. Every late night I'd worked so he could focus on studying, every sacrifice I'd made so he could have books and a laptop and a chance at something better, it was all worth it for that moment. "I'm gonna take care of you now," he promised, holding my face in his hands. "You worked so hard for this family, now it's my turn." For the first few years, he kept that promise in his own way. He got a job at a consulting firm downtown, moved into a nice apartment in Lincoln Park, and came by for dinner every Sunday. He'd bring groceries, sometimes, would fix little things around the house that were getting harder for me to manage. We'd sit on the front porch after dinner, and he'd tell me about his work, about the important clients he was meeting with, about the deals he was closing. "You raised a businessman, Mama," he'd say with pride. "Everything you taught me about working hard, about not giving up, I used that every day, but somewhere around year 3, the Sunday dinners became every other Sunday. Then, once a month, the phone calls got shorter. When he did come by, he'd spend half the time on his phone, taking calls from work, texting people I'd never met. Baby can't work, wait for just a few hours. I'd ask, Mama, you don't understand how competitive this industry is, he'd say, without looking up from his phone. I'm building something here. I'm creating opportunities. Then he met Vanessa. The first time he brought her to Sunday dinner. I tried so hard to make a good impression. I made my famous pot roast, the one that always made Marcus go back for seconds. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, put fresh flowers on the table, wore my good earrings. I wanted his girlfriend to feel welcome, to see that even though we didn't have much, we had love and warmth and a home full of good memories. Vanessa walked through my front door like she was touring a museum of poverty. I watched her eyes take in the furniture I'd been proud of for 20 years, the couch I'd saved up for, the coffee table Marcus had helped me pick out when he was in high school, the family photos covering every surface. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give to something you find quaint and a little sad. Double quotes, Mrs. Carter. Your home is so ... authentic, she said, which I later realized was a polite way of saying old-fashioned and outdated. During dinner, she talked about her job in marketing, about the condo she was renting in River North, about restaurants I'd never heard of and vacation destinations that cost more than I made in 6 months. Marcus hung on her every word, nodding along like she was sharing the secrets of the universe. Marcus has told me so much about how hard you worked to put him through school, she said, cutting her pot roast into tiny, precise pieces. That must have been such a struggle. The way she said struggle made it sound like a disease. I should be embarrassed about having caught. It wasn't a struggle, I said quietly. It was an investment, the best investment I ever made. After that dinner, Marcus's visits became even less frequent. When he did come by, Vanessa was usually with him, and their conversations were full of inside jokes about people and places I didn't know. They'd talk about their plans, expensive dinners, weekend trips to places like Nashville and Miami, shopping sprees that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Mama, you should travel more, Marcus said one evening, as we sat on the porch. See the world. You've been in this house for so long. Don't you want to experience something different? Baby, this house is my world, I told him. This is where I raised you and your sister. This is where your daddy's memory lives. This is home. He got quiet for a long time, staring out at the street where he used to ride his bike, where I used to watch him play basketball with the neighborhood kids. But don't you ever feel ... stuck? He asked finally. That word hit me like a slap. Stuck in the home I'd worked 40 years to pay off, in the place where every room held memories of him and Keisha growing up, in the neighborhood where I knew every neighbor's name and they knew mine. I feel grateful, I said. I feel blessed. I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't understand. Somewhere between graduating college and meeting Vanessa, my son had started seeing his childhood home not as a foundation, but as a limitation, not as the place that gave him everything he needed to succeed, but as a reminder of where he came from, and apparently, where he came from wasn't good enough anymore. The Sunday dinners stopped altogether after he and Vanessa got engaged. They were too busy planning their wedding, looking at houses in suburbs I'd never visited, building a life that seemed to have less and less room for the woman who'd made it all possible. On their wedding day, Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, standing at the altar of a church I'd never seen before. In front of people I'd never met, I sat in the front row, wearing the dress I'd bought for his graduation because it was still the nicest thing I owned, and I watched my son promise to love and honor a woman who'd never once asked about his childhood, about the sacrifices that had gotten him to that altar, about the mother who'd given him everything. During the reception, Marcus made a speech thanking everyone who'd helped shape him into the man he'd become. He thanked his college professors, his fraternity brothers, his business mentors. He thanked Vanessa's parents for welcoming him into their family. He never mentioned my name. Sitting at my table in the back of that fancy reception hall, watching my son celebrate his new life, I realized that the boy who used to promise to take care of me had become a man who was already forgetting where he came from. Marcus graduated from Northwestern University on a crisp May morning in 2006. I sat in that auditorium in my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought specifically for his graduation, even though it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 2 months, and watched my baby boy walk, across that stage to get his business degree. When they called his name, Marcus Jerome Carter, I cried so hard that Mrs. Patterson from church, who'd come with me for support, had to hand me her entire pack of tissues. That was my boy, the first Carter to graduate from college, the first one to wear a cap and gown, the first one to have opportunities I could only dream about when I was his age. After the ceremony, Marcus found me in the crowd, still in his graduation robes, and he picked me up and spun me around right there in front of everybody. "We did it, Mama," he said, and the way he said "we" made my heart sing, because it was we. Every late night I'd worked so he could focus on studying, every sacrifice I'd made so he could have books and a laptop and a chance at something better, it was all worth it for that moment. "I'm gonna take care of you now," he promised, holding my face in his hands. "You worked so hard for this family, now it's my turn." For the first few years, he kept that promise in his own way. He got a job at a consulting firm downtown, moved into a nice apartment in Lincoln Park, and came by for dinner every Sunday. He'd bring groceries, sometimes, would fix little things around the house that were getting harder for me to manage. We'd sit on the front porch after dinner, and he'd tell me about his work, about the important clients he was meeting with, about the deals he was closing. "You raised a businessman, Mama," he'd say with pride. "Everything you taught me about working hard, about not giving up, I used that every day." But somewhere around year 3, the Sunday dinners became every other Sunday. Then, once a month, the phone calls got shorter. When he did come by, he'd spend half the time on his phone, taking calls from work, texting people I'd never met. "Baby can't work, wait for just a few hours," I'd ask. "Mama, you don't understand how competitive this industry is," he'd say, without looking up from his phone. "I'm building something here. I'm creating opportunities." Then he met Vanessa. The first time he brought her to Sunday dinner. I tried so hard to make a good impression. I made my famous pot roast, the one that always made Marcus go back for seconds. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, put fresh flowers on the table, wore my good earrings. I wanted his girlfriend to feel welcome, to see that even though we didn't have much, we had love and warmth and a home full of good memories. Vanessa walked through my front door like she was touring a museum of poverty. I watched her eyes take in the furniture I'd been proud of for 20 years, the couch I'd saved up for, the coffee table Marcus had helped me pick out when he was in high school, the family photos covering every surface. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give to something you find quaint and a little sad. Double quotes, "Mrs. Carter, your home is so ... authentic," she said, which I later realized was a polite way of saying old-fashioned and outdated. During dinner, she talked about her job in marketing, about the condo she was renting in River North, about restaurants I'd never heard of and vacation destinations that cost more than I made in 6 months. Marcus hung on her every word, nodding along like she was sharing the secrets of the universe. "Marcus has told me so much about how hard you worked to put him through school," she said, cutting her pot roast into tiny, precise pieces. "That must have been such a struggle." The way she said struggle made it sound like a disease. I should be embarrassed about having caught. "It wasn't a struggle," I said quietly. "It was an investment, the best investment I ever made." After that dinner, Marcus's visits became even less frequent. When he did come by, Vanessa was usually with him, and their conversations were full of inside jokes about people and places I didn't know. They'd talk about their plans, expensive dinners, weekend trips to places like Nashville and Miami, shopping sprees that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mama, you should travel more," Marcus said one evening, as we sat on the porch. "See the world. You've been in this house for so long. Don't you want to experience something different?" "Baby, this house is my world," I told him. "This is where I raised you and your sister. This is where your daddy's memory lives. This is home." He got quiet for a long time, staring out at the street where he used to ride his bike, where I used to watch him play basketball with the neighborhood kids. "But don't you ever feel ... stuck?" he asked finally. That word hit me like a slap. Stuck, in the home I'd worked 40 years to pay off, in the place where every room held memories of him and Keisha growing up, in the neighborhood where I knew every neighbor's name and they knew mine. "I feel grateful," I said. "I feel blessed. I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't understand. Somewhere between graduating college and meeting Vanessa, my son had started seeing his childhood home not as a foundation, but as a limitation, not as the place that gave him everything he needed to succeed, but as a reminder of where he came from, and apparently, where he came from wasn't good enough anymore. The Sunday dinners stopped altogether after he and Vanessa got engaged. They were too busy planning their wedding, looking at houses in suburbs I'd never visited, building a life that seemed to have less and less room for the woman who'd made it all possible. On their wedding day, Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, standing at the altar of a church I'd never seen before. In front of people I'd never met, I sat in the front row, wearing the dress I'd bought for his graduation because it was still the nicest thing I owned, and I watched my son promise to love and honor a woman who'd never once asked about his childhood, about the sacrifices that had gotten him to that altar, about the mother who'd given him everything. During the reception, Marcus made a speech thanking everyone who'd helped shape him into the man he'd become. He thanked his college professors, his fraternity brothers, his business mentors. He thanked Vanessa's parents for welcoming him into their family. He never mentioned my name. Sitting at my table in the back of that fancy reception hall, watching my son celebrate his new life, I realized that the boy who used to promise to take care of me had become a man who was already forgetting where he came from. 3 years of marriage changed Marcus in ways I never could have anticipated. The son who used to call me every few days now went months without reaching out. When he did contact me, it was usually through text messages, brief, functional communications about holidays or family obligations, never just to say hello or see how I was doing. Vanessa, meanwhile, had perfected the art of surface-level kindness. She'd hug me at family gatherings and ask about my health with the tone of someone inquiring about the weather. Her compliments felt rehearsed. "Evelyn, you look so good for your age." Or "This house has such character." Everything she said sounded supportive until you really listened to it, until you heard the subtle condescension wrapped in concern. I started noticing the way they looked at my home differently now. Vanessa's eyes would linger on the outdated wallpaper in the dining room, the worn spots in the hardwood floors, the kitchen appliances I'd been proud of for 15 years but that now seemed ancient, compared to the stainless steel and granite they'd installed in their own place. "Mama, when's the last time you updated anything in here?" Marcus asked during one of their rare visits. He was standing in my kitchen, running his finger along the counter like he was checking for dust. "Updated what, baby? Everything works fine. But don't you want something more modern? Something easier to maintain?" I looked around at my kitchen, the place where I'd made thousands of meals, where I'd helped Marcus with homework, where Keisha had told me about her first heartbreak, where I'd sat with neighbors and friends and shared countless cups of coffee and hours of conversation. "This kitchen has served me well for 25 years, I said. "It's got everything I need." Vanessa exchanged a look with Marcus, one of those quick glances that married couples share when they think they're being subtle. "Of course it has," she said sweetly. "It's just that, well, maintaining an older home can be so expensive, and at your age, all that upkeep. I've been maintaining this house just fine," I said, hearing the edge in my own voice. "Oh, we know you have," Marcus said quickly. "It's just that maybe it's time to think about something that would be easier for you, something with less responsibility." That conversation planted a seed that grew over the following months. Their visits became inspections, not of me, but of the house. Marcus would point out things that needed repair: a loose board on the front porch, a window that stuck, a faucet that dripped. Vanessa would make helpful suggestions about updating and modernizing, always framed as being for my own good. "You know, Evelyn," she said one afternoon while Marcus was in the bathroom, "there are some beautiful senior communities around here. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or being alone. Places where you could make friends your own age." The way she said "your own age" made it sound like I was some ancient relic who'd outlived her usefulness. "I have friends," I said. "I have neighbors I've known for 20 years. I have a community here." "Oh, I'm sure you do," she said with that practiced smile. "But isn't it isolating, being the only one left from the old days? I mean, neighborhoods change, people move away. Double quotes. What she didn't understand was that yes, some neighbors had moved away over the years, but others had moved in. I knew the young couple next door who worked double shifts to afford their mortgage, just like I had. I knew Mrs. Chen, across the street, who was learning English and practicing with me over the garden fence. I knew the Rodriguez family who'd moved in last year with their 3 kids, and how their youngest daughter reminded me of Keisha at that age. This wasn't isolation, this was continuity. This was being part of something that grew and changed while staying rooted in the same soil. But Marcus and Vanessa saw it differently. They saw an old woman rattling around in a house too big for her, sitting on an asset that could be converted into cash. They saw inefficiency. They saw waste. I started overhearing conversations they thought I couldn't hear, phone calls Marcus would take in my backyard, discussions they'd have in their car before coming inside. Words and phrases would drift to my ears. Property value, equity, waste of resources, stubborn. The most painful one was when I heard Marcus talking to someone about getting mom to see reason, as if wanting to stay in the home I'd worked 40 years to pay off was unreasonable, as if loving the place where I'd raised my children was some kind of mental defect. One evening, Vanessa called me directly, not Marcus, but Vanessa herself. "Evelyn, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she said in that voice she used when she wanted something. "Marcus and I have been talking, and we're really concerned about you living alone in that big house. We've been looking into some options that might be good for everyone." "What kind of options?" "Well, there are some really nice assisted living places, not nursing homes," she added quickly, "but communities where you'd have your own apartment but also have help available if you need it. And the best part is, they handle all the maintenance and upkeep." My heart started beating faster. "I don't need help, Vanessa. I'm managing just fine on my own." "Of course you are. But wouldn't it be nice not to have to worry about all that responsibility? And honestly, Marcus and I were thinking that if you were in a more manageable situation, we could help with the house. You know, fix it up, maybe rent it out for you so you'd have additional income." There it was. Buried under all that concern and helpful suggestions was what they really wanted. "My house? I appreciate you thinking of me," I said carefully, "but I'm not ready to leave my home." "Well, you don't have to decide right now," she said, but I could hear the frustration she was trying to hide. "Just think about it, okay? We only want what's best for you." After I hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the photos on my mantelpiece, pictures of Marcus at various ages. His graduation, his wedding, family holidays, when had the little boy who used to build blanket forts in this very room grown into a man who saw this house as an inconvenience to be managed. That night, I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out the manila folder I kept in the back corner, behind my winter coats. I hadn't looked at these papers in years, but suddenly I felt the need to hold them, to remind myself of what was real, and what was legal, and what was mine. The deed to the house, with my name on it, just my name, the mortgage papers, marked paid in full as of 2014, the insurance documents, the tax records, all of it, proof that this house belonged to me, and me alone. I'd never needed to wave these papers around before because it had never occurred to me that my own son would try to take my home away from me. But listening to those phone calls, hearing those suggestions, feeling the pressure that was building with each visit, I was starting to understand that Marcus and Vanessa weren't just making conversation about my living situation, they were making plans. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday. Marcus actually called, which was rare enough to make me suspicious, and asked if he and Vanessa could come over on Saturday evening for a family dinner. "Just like old times, Mama," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach clench with worry. "Of course, baby. You want me to make your favorite pot roast? Actually, we were thinking we could bring dinner. You know, give you a break from cooking." That should have been my first warning sign. Marcus knew I loved cooking for family. It was one of the ways I showed love, feeding people, bringing them around my table, making sure they left my house with full stomachs and hearts. For him to want to bring dinner felt like he was taking away one of my last chances to take care of him. But I agreed, because I was hungry for their company, for any sign that my son still wanted to spend time with me. Saturday evening came, and they arrived with bags from some expensive steakhouse downtown. Vanessa was dressed like she was going to a business meeting, sharp blazer, heels, makeup that looked like it had been applied by a professional. Marcus wore a suit, which struck me as odd for a family dinner at home. They'd also brought Darius, my 16-year-old grandson, which surprised me. He usually had better things to do on Saturday nights than have dinner with his grandmother. But there he was, looking uncomfortable in clothes that were too nice for a casual meal, his usual easy smile replaced by something that looked almost like dread. "Grandma," he said, giving me a hug that lasted a little too long, like he was trying to tell me something without words. We sat down to eat in my dining room, the same room where we'd shared hundreds of meals over the years. The steaks were perfectly cooked, the sides expensive and elaborate, but everything tasted like cardboard in my mouth. The conversation felt forced, full of long pauses and subjects that nobody wanted to pursue. Finally, after we'd finished eating and Vanessa had complimented my home decorating choices with that tone that suggested she was really cataloging everything that would need to be changed. Marcus cleared his throat. Mama, we need to talk about something important. I set down my water glass and looked at my son, really looked at him. His jaw was set in that stubborn way I remembered from when he was a teenager, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Whatever he was about to say, he'd rehearsed it. We've been worried about you, he began, living alone in this big house, dealing with all the maintenance and upkeep. It's a lot for someone your age. I'm 78, not 98, I said, and I've been managing just fine. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake concern. Evelyn, we know you have, but we can see how tired you are, how stressed you get about keeping up with everything. Wouldn't it be nice to have less responsibility, to be somewhere you could enjoy your retirement without worrying about leaky faucets and property taxes and all the headaches that come with homeownership? I looked at Darius, who was staring down at his plate like he wanted to disappear into it. Then I looked back at my son. What exactly are you suggesting? Marcus took a deep breath. We think it would be best if you moved into a senior living community. Somewhere nice, somewhere safe. Somewhere you could make new friends and have activities and not have to worry about taking care of a house. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt something cold spread through my chest. Something that felt like betrayal and heartbreak and fury, all mixed together. And what happens to my house? I asked quietly. Well, Vanessa said, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a child who needed comforting. We were thinking Marcus and I could take care of it for you. Fix it up, maybe sell it, and then you'd have that money to help pay for the assisted living. Or we could keep it as an investment property, rent it out and give you the income. I pulled my hand away from hers. This house isn't for sale. This house isn't for rent. This house is my home. Marcus's voice got harder. Mama, be reasonable. You're rattling around in here all by yourself. This place is too much for you to handle, and it's only going to get worse as you get older. We're trying to help you. I didn't ask for help. That's the problem, Vanessa said, and for just a moment, the mask slipped and I saw the real her underneath, cold, calculating, impatient. You're too proud to admit when you need help, but Marcus and I can see what you can't see. This situation isn't sustainable. I looked at my grandson again. His hands were clenched into fists on the table, and there were tears in his eyes. Darius, baby, do you have something to say about all this? He glanced at his parents, then back at me. I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Grandma. Darius, his father said sharply, we've talked about this. No, the boy said, his voice stronger now. You talked, I listened, but I don't agree. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back, running his hands through his hair. Mama, I didn't want to have to say this, but you're making me say it. He turned to face me, and his expression was colder than I'd ever seen it. This house is too much for you. You can't maintain it properly anymore. The neighborhood is changing, and not for the better. You're isolated here, you're alone, and you're being stubborn about accepting help. So what are you saying, Marcus? He looked at Vanessa, who nodded encouragingly, like she was his coach, pushing him to make the hard play. I'm saying it's time for you to go. We've looked at several assisted living facilities, and we've found a really nice one that has an opening next month. We'll help you pack, we'll help you move, and we'll take care of everything here. The room went completely silent. I could hear the old house settling around us, the sounds I'd been listening to for 40 years. I could hear Darius's sharp intake of breath. I could hear my own heart breaking. You want me to leave my home? I want you to be safe and cared for, in a place I've never seen, with people I don't know, while you and your wife take over the house I've spent 40 years paying for. Mama, get out. The words came out so quietly I wasn't sure I'd said them out loud, but Marcus heard me. But I said, get out of my house. All of you. Vanessa's mask slipped completely now. Evelyn, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like a stubborn child. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking with anger and hurt and something I hadn't felt in a long time. The fierce protectiveness of a mother whose cubs are being threatened, except in this case, the threat was coming from one of my own cubs. This is my house, I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. I bought it. I paid for it. I maintained it. I raised my children in it. And now you want to take it away from me like I'm some incompetent old woman who can't make her own decisions. You are an incompetent old woman, Vanessa snapped, finally showing her true colors. You're sitting on a gold mine of equity while living like some sort of poverty-stricken martyr, and it's ridiculous. Marcus grabbed his wife's arm. Vanessa, that's enough. But it wasn't enough. The truth was out now, floating in the air between us like poison gas. Double quotes. No, Marcus, it's not enough, I said. Your wife just told me exactly what she thinks of me, and apparently what you think too. So let me be very clear, I'm not going anywhere. This is my house, and I'll leave when I'm dead and not a moment before. I walked to the front door and opened it. Now, get out, all of you. Darius stood up first, tears streaming down his face. Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't you apologize for them. Baby, you've got nothing to be sorry for. Marcus and Vanessa gathered their things in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over the room like a heavy blanket. As they reached the door, Marcus turned back to me. Mama, this isn't over. We're not going to let you destroy yourself out of pride. The only thing being destroyed here is my relationship with my son, I said, and you're the one doing the destroying. After they left, I sat in my living room in the dark, listening to the house breathe around me. For the first time in 40 years, this place that had always felt like sanctuary felt under siege, but they didn't know about the folder upstairs. They didn't know about the papers that would prove, once and for all, whose house this really was. The days after that terrible dinner crawled by like wounded animals. I kept expecting Marcus to call, to apologize, to say that he and Vanessa had been out of line and that they were sorry for trying to force me out of my home. But my phone stayed silent. I tried to go about my normal routine, grocery shopping, tending to my small garden in the backyard, attending Sunday service at Mount Olive Baptist Church, where I'd been a member for 30 years, but everything felt different now, colored by the knowledge that my own son saw me as an obstacle to be removed, rather than a mother to be loved. Mrs. Washington from next door noticed the change in me during one of our regular front porch conversations. We'd been talking about the weather, about her grandson's college plans, about the new family moving in down the street, when she stopped mid-sentence and really looked at me. Evelyn Carter, what's got you looking so troubled? She asked. You've got sorrow written all over your face. I wanted to tell her everything. Mrs. Washington had been my neighbor for 15 years, had brought me soup when I was sick, had watered my plants when I went to visit Keisha in Atlanta, had celebrated with me when Marcus graduated from college, and when he got married. She was more than a neighbor, she was family I'd chosen. But the shame of it all stuck in my throat like a stone. How do you tell someone that your successful, college-educated son, the one they'd watched grow up, the one they'd praised you for raising so well, had looked you in the eye and told you to pack your bags and leave the home you'd sacrificed everything to provide for him? Just getting old, I suppose, I said, which was a lie but felt safer than the truth. She studied my face with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through her own share of heartbreak. Honey, age ain't got nothing to do with the kind of pain I see in your eyes. That's the kind of hurt that comes from people, not from years. I nodded but didn't elaborate, and she was kind enough not to push. The silence from Marcus stretched into weeks. No phone calls, no text messages, no surprise visits. It was like I'd ceased to exist the moment I'd refused to go along with his plan to warehouse me in some assisted living facility while he and Vanessa took over my house. But Darius was different. 3 days after that awful dinner, I found him sitting on my front porch steps when I came back from the grocery store. He was wearing his basketball practice clothes, his backpack thrown carelessly beside him, and he looked like he'd been crying. Grandma, can we talk? He asked, standing up as I approached with my shopping bags. Of course, baby, help me with these groceries and we'll sit in the kitchen. As we unpacked the bags, Darius was unusually quiet. Normally, he'd be telling me about school, about basketball practice, about some girl he liked or some teacher who was giving him trouble. But today he moved around my kitchen like he was carrying the weight of the world on his 16-year-old shoulders. Finally, after we'd put everything away and I'd poured him a glass of the sweet tea he'd loved since he was little, he spoke. What Dad and Mom are trying to do to you, it's not right. Grandma. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Baby, these are grown-up problems you don't need to worry about. No, he said, pulling his hand away gently but firmly. I'm not a little kid anymore. I understand what's happening, and I understand why it's wrong. He took a shaky breath. They've been talking about this for months, Grandma, planning it. Mom keeps talking about how much money this house could be worth, how they could fix it up and sell it, or rent it out. She's already been looking at bigger houses for us to move into, using the money from selling this place. My heart clenched. Darius, you don't have to tell me this. I don't want to put you in the middle of. I'm already in the middle of it. His voice cracked with emotion. Do you know what it's like, sitting at dinner every night, listening to them plan how to get rid of my grandmother. Do you know how it feels to hear my own mother talk about you like you're some kind of inconvenience? Tears started rolling down his cheeks, and I got up to sit beside him, pulling him into my arms the way I had when he was little and had scraped his knee, or had a bad dream. This house is where I learned to walk, he whispered against my shoulder. This is where you taught me to tie my shoes, where you helped me with my homework when Mom and Dad were too busy with work. This is where you made me chicken soup when I was sick, where you let me sleep in your bed during thunderstorms when I was scared. I held him tighter, my own tears mixing with his. I remember when I was 8 and I asked you why you never moved to a bigger house like some of my friends' families did. He continued, you told me that home isn't about how big a place is, it's about how much love lives inside it. You said this house had enough love in it to last forever. It still does, baby. It still does. He pulled back to look at me, his young face serious beyond his years. Then why do they want to take it away from you? It was the question I'd been asking myself every day since that dinner. Why would the son I'd sacrificed everything for want to strip away the foundation that had made his success possible? Why would he look at the home that had sheltered and nurtured him and see only dollar signs? Sometimes people forget where they came from, I said carefully. Sometimes success makes them think they're better than their beginnings, instead of grateful for them. That's stupid, Darius said with the blunt honesty of youth. Dad wouldn't even have gotten to go to college if you hadn't worked so hard to keep this house and keep us stable. How can he forget that? I don't know, baby. I truly don't know. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The kind of peace that comes from being with someone who truly understands you. Finally, Darius spoke again. Grandma, is there anything you can do to stop them? Legally, I mean. I thought about the manila folder upstairs, about the papers that proved this house was mine and mine alone, but I hadn't wanted to have to use them. I'd hoped that love and family loyalty would be enough. I'd hoped that Marcus would remember who he was and where he came from before it came to PPI legal documents and property rights. There might be, I said, but I was hoping it wouldn't come to that. What do you mean? I looked at my grandson, this beautiful young man who still had enough heart to sit on his grandmother's porch and cry for her pain, who still understood the difference between right and wrong, even when his own parents had lost their way. This house is legally mine, Darius. Your father and stepmother can't force me to leave, no matter how much they want to. But I was hoping that wouldn't matter, that they'd remember that family is more important than money, that love is more important than real estate. But they don't remember, he said quietly, and they're not going to. No, I admitted, I don't think they are. After Darius left that evening, I sat in my living room, feeling more alone than I had since Jerome died. Not physically alone, I'd been physically alone in this house for years, and had learned to find comfort in my own company, but emotionally alone, cut off from the son I'd raised and the daughter-in-law I'd tried so hard to welcome into our family. That night, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and pulled out that manila folder again. I spread the papers across my bed and stared at them in the lamplight. The deed with my name on it, the mortgage papers marked paid in full, the insurance documents, the tax records. These papers represented 40 years of my life, 40 years of working double shifts, of choosing between groceries and new clothes, of fixing what I could and doing without what I couldn't afford. 40 years of building something solid and permanent in a world that had offered me very little security. Marcus had been 8 when I bought this house. He'd never known what it was like to wonder where you were going to sleep next month, to have a landlord who could decide your fate with 30 days' notice, to move from place to place because you couldn't afford to stay anywhere permanently. This house had given him stability. But more than that, it had given him the confidence that comes from knowing you belong somewhere. It had given him a foundation solid enough to build a life on. And now he wanted to tear that foundation away from the woman who'd poured her life into creating it. I gathered up the papers and put them back in the folder. But this time I didn't hide it in the back of the closet. This time I put it in my bedside drawer where I could reach it easily, because I was starting to understand that love and loyalty might not be enough to protect what I'd built. I was starting to understand that sometimes, even with your own children, you have to be prepared to fight for what's yours. The thought broke my heart, but it also gave me strength. I'd fought for this house once before, worked and sacrificed and scrapped to make it mine. If I had to fight for it again, even against my own son, then that's what I'd do. that this house wasn't just my shelter. It was my dignity, my independence, my legacy. It was the physical manifestation of every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd pursued, every promise I'd kept. And I'd be damned if I was going to let anyone take it away from me. Not even the boy I'd loved more than my own life. 2 months had passed since that devastating dinner, and the silence from Marcus had become a constant ache in my chest. But if I thought the quiet meant he'd given up on his plan to remove me from my home, I was sadly mistaken. The truth came to me through Mrs. Washam, who'd seen a strange car parked outside my house 3 times in the past week while I was at church or running errands. "Evelyn, honey, I don't want to worry you," she said over the fence while we were both tending to our gardens, "but there was a man here yesterday with a clipboard, taking pictures of your house. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was doing some kind of assessment for the family." My blood ran cold. What kind of assessment? He wouldn't say exactly, but he spent a long time walking around, looking at your roof, your foundation, writing things down. He had one of those official-looking badges, like he was from the city or something. That evening, I called Marcus directly for the first time since our confrontation. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice cautious. "Mama, Marcus, I need to know what's going on. Mrs. Washington saw someone assessing my house." "What aren't you telling me?" There was a long pause. I could hear Vanessa's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mama, we're concerned about your safety. We hired someone to do a structural assessment of the house, just to make sure it's safe for you to be living there alone. You hired someone to come to my house without my permission. We're family. We have a right to be concerned about your welfare." The casualness with which he said it, like having strangers inspect my property without my consent, was just normal family concern, made me so angry I could barely speak. "No, Marcus, you don't have that right. This is my house, and you had no business sending anyone here without asking me first. Mama, please don't be difficult about this. We just want to make sure." I hung up on him. For the first time in his 40 years of life, I hung up on my son. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I called the city's building inspector's office to find out if there had been any official inspection requests for my property. There hadn't been. Whatever Marcus and Vanessa were up to, it wasn't through official channels. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. I called my lawyer. Robert Martinez had handled my will and a few other legal matters over the years. He was a kind man in his 50s who'd always treated me with respect and patience, never talking down to me or making me feel stupid for asking questions. Double quotes, "Mrs. Carter, it's good to hear from you. What can I help you with today?" I told him everything about Marcus and Vanessa's pressure for me to move into assisted living, about the dinner where they'd essentially demanded I leave my home, about the unauthorized inspection of my property. "Mrs. Carter, I need to be very clear about something," he said when I finished. "This house is in your name only, correct?" "Yes, completely. I bought it myself, paid for it myself. Marcus has never been on the deed or the mortgage. Then legally, he has no right to force you out, no right to sell it, and no right to have it inspected without your permission. The house is your property, and your property alone. But what if he tries to have me declared incompetent or something? What if he tries to get some kind of guardianship?" Robert's voice became serious. "That would require a court proceeding, and he'd need to prove that you're unable to make decisions about your own welfare. From our conversation today, you seem perfectly capable of managing your own affairs. Are you having any health issues that might affect your mental capacity?" "No, I'm sharp as I've ever been. I just turned 78. But my mind is clear, and I'm managing my household and finances just fine." "Good. Here's what I recommend. I'm going to send you some documents that establish a clear paper trail of your mental competency and your wishes regarding your property. We'll also put together a comprehensive file of all your property documents, deed, tax records, insurance papers, so if anyone tries to challenge your ownership, we have everything organized." "There's something else," I said, hesitating. "I'm worried they might try to claim I can't maintain the house properly, that it's unsafe or something. Have you had any recent problems with maintenance? Any code violations or safety issues?" "No, nothing like that. I keep up with everything. I had the furnace serviced last fall. The roof was repaired 2 years ago. All my utilities are working fine. The house is in good condition. Excellent. I'll arrange for an independent home inspection, a real one, by a licensed inspector, so we have documentation of the property's condition. That way, if anyone tries to claim the house is unsafe or not properly maintained, we have professional documentation to the contrary." After I hung up with Robert, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control. For too long, I'd been reacting to Marcus and Vanessa's pressure, feeling defensive and hurt and powerless. Now I was taking action to protect what was mine. But that evening, as I sat in my kitchen eating dinner alone, I found myself crying into my meatloaf, not from fear or anger this time, but from grief. How had it come to this? How had the relationship with my son deteriorated to the point where I needed legal protection from him? I thought about the little boy who used to sit at this very table, telling me about his day at school, asking me to help him with math homework, begging me to make his favorite cookies. Where was that boy now? What had happened to the young man who'd hugged me at his graduation and promised to take care of me? The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Robert's office sent me papers to sign. The independent inspector came and thoroughly examined my house, finding it to be in excellent condition for its age, and I organized all my important documents in a new filing system. But the most important thing I did was something I should have done months ago. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out that manila folder, the one that held the deed to my house, the mortgage papers marked paid in full, and all the other documents that proved this house was mine and mine alone. I sat on my bed and read through every page, remembering the day I'd signed each document, the sacrifices I'd made to earn the right to sign them. Then I made photocopies of everything and put the originals in a safe deposit box at the bank, because if Marcus and Vanessa wanted to play legal games with me, I was going to be ready for them. 3 days later, Marcus called again. "Mama, we need to talk. Vanessa and I have been discussing your situation, and we've found a really nice assisted living place that has an opening next month. We'd like to take you to see it." "I'm not interested. You haven't even seen it yet. It's really beautiful, and they have lots of activities. And Marcus, let me make something very clear to you. I'm not moving. This is my house, legally and completely, and I'm staying here. Mama, don't make this harder than it has to be." Something in his tone, the condescending patience, like he was talking to a stubborn child, made me snap. "Harder than it has to be. You want to know what's hard, Marcus? Hard is working 40 years to buy and pay for a house, only to have your own son try to take it away from you. Hard is loving someone more than your own life and having them treat you like you're some kind of burden to be disposed of. That's not what we're doing." "Yes, it is. But here's something you don't seem to understand. This house isn't yours to take. It never was. I bought it, I paid for it, and it belongs to me. And if you try to force me out, you're going to discover just how stubborn this old woman can be." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Mama, we're just trying to help." "No, you're trying to help yourselves. To my house, to my equity, to my life's work. But it's not going to happen." I hung up again, but this time I felt strong instead of heartbroken. This time, I felt like a woman who'd fought for everything she had and was prepared to fight for it again. The folder was ready, the lawyers were on standby, the inspection was complete. If Marcus wanted a war, he was about to get one. The ambush came on a quiet Thursday evening in November. I was in my kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Not one car, two. I looked out the window and saw Marcus's BMW and another car I didn't recognize, a sleek black sedan that looked expensive and official. My heart started racing. This wasn't a family visit. This felt like a coordinated attack. The doorbell rang, and I dried my hands slowly, taking a moment to steel myself for whatever was coming. When I opened the door, Marcus was standing there with Vanessa, but they weren't alone. There was a man in his 60s wearing a conservative gray suit, carrying a briefcase, and behind him, a woman about Marcus's age with a clipboard and the kind of smile that people wear when they're about to ruin your day. "Mama, we need to come in," Marcus said, but it wasn't a request. He was already moving toward the door, forcing me to step back or be knocked over. "Marcus, what is this? Who are these people?" "This is Dr. Patterson from Senior Care Solutions," Vanessa said, gesturing to the woman with the clipboard. "And this is Mr. Reynolds. He's a elder care attorney. We've asked them to come help us have a conversation about your living situation." I felt like I'd been slapped. They'd brought strangers into my home, professionals whose job it was to convince elderly people to give up their independence. They'd orchestrated an intervention, complete with expert witnesses, without even asking my permission. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mama, please, just listen to what they have to say," Marcus pleaded. "Dr. Patterson has looked at your situation, and she thinks the assisted living facility we found would be perfect for you. She's looked at my situation. How can she look at my situation when she's never met me before this moment? Dr. Patterson stepped forward with that practiced smile. Mrs. Carter, your son and daughter-in-law have shared some concerns about your welfare. I understand you're living alone in a large house, that you're not getting proper nutrition or social interaction, that you're isolated from medical care. Double quotes. Every word she spoke was a lie wrapped in professional concern. I looked at Marcus, horrified. What have you told these people? Only the truth, Mama. That you're struggling to maintain this house. That you're lonely. That you need more support than you're getting. That's not the truth. That's not even close to the truth. Mr. Reynolds, the attorney, opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Carter, we understand this is difficult, but your family is concerned about your capacity to make good decisions about your care. We're here to help facilitate a transition that would be best for everyone. My capacity. The words came out as a whisper, but inside me, rage was building like a hurricane. My capacity to make decisions. Now, don't get upset, Vanessa said in that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. No one is questioning your intelligence, Evelyn, but sometimes older adults need guidance, making big life decisions. Sometimes what seems right to us isn't actually what's best for us. I looked around my living room, at these strangers who'd invaded my home, at my son who was nodding along with their assessment of my incompetence, at my daughter-in-law, who was looking at my furniture like she was already planning how to get rid of it. That's when I heard the front door open, and Darius's voice calling out, "Grandma, I'm here." Marcus spun around. What is he doing here? I called him, I said. Which wasn't entirely true. Darius had started showing up every few days after school. Partly to check on me, and partly to escape the tension at his own house. But his timing was perfect. Darius walked into the living room and stopped short when he saw the crowd of people surrounding his grandmother. His young face immediately hardened with anger. What's going on here? Your grandmother is being difficult about accepting help, Vanessa said. We've brought some experts to explain why moving to assisted living would be the best thing for her. Darius looked at me, then at his father, then at the strangers in expensive clothes who were treating his grandmother like she was mentally deficient. Did anyone ask Grandma if she wanted these people in her house? Darius, this doesn't concern you, his father said sharply. It concerns me plenty. This is my grandmother, and this is her house. And you can't just bring strangers here and gang up on her. Dr. Patterson tried to intervene with her professional smile. Young man, I understand you care about your grandmother, but sometimes teenagers don't understand the complexity of elder care decisions. I understand plenty, Darius said, his voice getting stronger. I understand that my grandmother takes care of herself just fine. I understand that she owns this house and has every right to live in it. And I understand that you people are trying to bully an elderly woman in her own home. The room fell silent. Even the professionals seemed taken aback by the fierce protectiveness of this 16-year-old boy. That's when I made my decision. I'd been holding back, hoping that love and family loyalty would win out over greed and manipulation. But looking at these people, strangers who'd been paid to help my son steal my independence, and Marcus himself, who'd brought them here to gang up on his own mother, I realized that hope was foolish. I need to get something from upstairs, I said quietly. Mama, whatever you need to get can wait, Marcus said. We need to finish this conversation. No, I said, my voice getting stronger. We don't, because this conversation is based on lies. I walked to my bedroom and retrieved the manila folder from my bedside drawer. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time, from rage, from betrayal, from the righteous anger of a woman who'd been pushed too far. When I came back downstairs, they were all talking in hushed tones, probably discussing strategies for handling my difficult behavior. They stopped talking when they saw me. I stood in the center of my living room, holding that folder like it was a weapon, which, in a way, it was. Marcus, I want you to tell these people exactly what legal right you have to make decisions about my house. He looked confused. Mama, we've been over this. We're just trying to help answer the question. What legal right do you have to make decisions about my house? I am your son. I'm looking out for your best interests. That's not a legal right. Mr. Reynolds, as an attorney, perhaps you can explain to my son what legal right he has to make decisions about property that doesn't belong to him. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Well, if there were concerns about competency, the family could potentially seek guardianship. But I haven't been declared incompetent, have I? In fact, No one has even tried to have me declared incompetent, because I'm not incompetent. I opened the manila folder and pulled out the papers inside the deed, the mortgage documents, the recent independent inspection report, the letter from my doctor confirming my mental and physical health. Marcus, would you like to explain to your hired experts exactly whose name is on the deed to this house? His face went pale. Mama, what are you doing? I'm showing them the truth. The truth you apparently forgot to mention when you were describing my situation to them. I held up the deed. This house is in my name. Only my name. I bought it in 1984 with my own money. I paid the mortgage with my own earnings for 30 years. And I own it free and clear. Dr. Patterson looked from the papers to Marcus, confusion replacing her professional smile. Mr. Carter, you didn't mention that the property was solely in your mother's name. It doesn't matter whose name is on the deed, Vanessa said quickly. The issue is whether she can safely live alone in a house this size. Actually, I said, pulling out the inspection report, according to this independent home inspection I had done last week, this house is in excellent condition and poses no safety risks to its occupant. Mr. Reynolds was looking distinctly uncomfortable now. Mrs. Carter, perhaps we should. And this, I continued, pulling out the letter from my doctor, is a letter from my physician stating that I am in good physical and mental health, that I'm fully capable of making my own decisions about my living situation, and that there are no medical reasons why I shouldn't continue living independently. The silence in the room was deafening. The professionals Marcus had hired to help him force me out of my home were realizing they'd been brought here under false pretenses. I looked directly at my son. So let me make something very clear to everyone in this room. This is my house. I own it. I maintain it. I'm competent to live in it. And I'm not going anywhere. Mama, you can't throw me out of what was never yours. Marcus, not now, not ever.